Hi, everyone. This is Lainey Poi with the Preeclampsia Foundation. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Rachel Lewis. Rachel is the founder of Brave Mamas, an online community offering support to the pregnancy and infant loss community. Rachel's understanding of pregnancy and infant loss is quite personal, and she'll share more about that. But she also has the unique perspective of being a HELLP syndrome survivor as well. We're chatting with her today to talk about her newest written resource for grieving parents, Unexpecting. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rachel. So, could you tell us just a little bit about your personal experience with both pregnancy loss and preeclampsia?
Absolutely. So my first pregnancy, I had a threatened miscarriage at 8 weeks, and the pregnancy the pregnancy continued, and our daughter did survive the pregnancy, but we also had threatened premature labor at 28 weeks, and then at 36 weeks I developed severe upper abdominal pain, as well as severe nausea and vomiting, and went into the hospital. And at that point, my blood pressure was still technically in the normal range. Looking back at my records, I could see that my blood pressure had actually jumped because it had been so low before, but they didn't catch that at the hospital. And so they basically just told me I was dehydrated and sent me home. And I was feeling better the next 2 days. And then on Monday, I woke up in the morning. So, like, after the weekend, woke up and I was feeling just as bad as before. It just sort of felt like somebody had put a knife in my stomach, and I was handling the contractions okay, but it was just the severe pain that I couldn't handle. And so I was like, this time I was like, give me like pain medicine as soon as possible. Like, I'm not leaving until you figure this out. And at that point, I had my reflexes. I had clonus with my reflexes. My blood pressure was high. It was interesting because the nurse took it and she was like, well, this can't be right. And so she just kept taking it. And then they got a new cuff, and then they got a new nurse. And everybody's like, well, this can't be right. Obviously it was. And then also my liver enzymes were like 9 times what they were supposed to be. And so they recognized that I had HELLP syndrome. But interestingly enough, they didn't use that word. I didn't know what I had for a couple days. My mother-in-law was the one, who's a nurse, who actually told me the name of what I was going through. And my daughter's heart rate decelled for about 8 minutes. They were really struggling to get it back up, and so it was just an immediate C-section to get her out. And so she did survive that pregnancy, but that definitely affected. It gave me birth trauma and some PTSD from that experience, as well as affected sort of what we planned moving forward for our family. My husband was very much in the position where he's like, I don't want to ever have to face the decision of, do I want to choose my daughter or my wife? Um, so he was so nervous, and it was so hard on him just watching everything unfold and feeling helpless. Um, and so we decided, we're going to be done having biological children, and we will just we're going to adopt. And so 2 years, when my daughter was 2 years, almost three, we got our foster care license. And shortly after that, I found out I was pregnant on accident. And this time, I think because I had just given up on the idea of having a pregnancy at all, I just got attached right away. I was so excited. I was scared out of my mind, but also so happy. And that pregnancy, at 7.5 weeks, my tube tore, and I was internally bleeding, and I was rushed into an emergency surgery. And my OB was able to save my life, and she was able to save my fertility. But of course, she was unable to save my baby. And that was the start of about 5 years of losses. We had five first trimester losses over 5 years. And then we finally had our rainbow baby. Um, And she somehow we escaped that pregnancy, HELLP free, preeclampsia free, and pretty much mostly complication free. So it was a very healing pregnancy and experience. And so, sort of having gone through all of that, I recognize that there's this need for us to talk about pregnancy loss more openly and to have community around this issue because it's such a common issue, but at the same time, it's also one that's not commonly spoken of freely. And so I just sort of recognized that there was this need, and I just created the kind of support that I felt like was lacking in my own journey.
You've spent many years being that compassionate online resource for the pregnancy and infant loss community through
Mm.
your blog, The Lewis Note, and your active support programs for families of loss. So, what made you decide now was the time to write and publish
Mm.
Unexpecting to further support this community in their time of need?
Well, I think I knew I wanted to write a book 9 years ago. When I was going through my second loss, it was different than my first in that I found out I was going to miscarry from a call from a nurse. And she just said, your HCG numbers have dropped. Let us know if you lose more than, if you go through more than one pad in an hour. And that was sort of the only instruction I received on how to miscarry. And I went to Barnes and Noble with my husband and I was like, I just want to find a resource. And I did like, I don't want to wait for, Amazon to deliver anything. I just like, I want it in my hands and I want it right now.
Right.
Just something that can tell me like how to prepare because I don't know what I need. I don't know what to expect. And when I went to Barnes and Noble that day, we found two books. One of them, the title insinuated that I could have just not miscarried had I tried hard enough, which I mean, I couldn't even open the book. I was just like, no, can I
Yes.
toss this across the store?
Right.
And then the other was called Taking Charge of Your Fertility, which it's a very popular book. So you may be familiar with that. And that one is an excellent resource for those of you like, for anybody who's wanting to know more about their fertility and how it works. And so it's an amazing book. But in my circumstance, I had already tried to take charge and it didn't work. Um, and so I just left that day feeling like there has to be a book out there. Um, and when I couldn't find it, I was like, I'm just gonna write that book. But with publishing, it's a long process. And I had to walk through a lot of rejections in order to have my book accepted and then before that to get an agent. And so it's one of those things that it just took a lot of time um to do. And actually it just came out, but I signed my book contract 2 years ago, so I've been actively working on the book, including the book proposal process now for about 2.5 to 3 years, just on this one book.
Yes, it's a long process, but when
Mhm.
you're a loss and infertility patient, patience is definitely one of your strongest suits for sure. And
Yes.
I think,
Trial by fire, right?
right, exactly. And I think one of the things that struck me the most about Unexpecting was how well you deal with the up and down emotions around pregnancy and infant loss. And
Mhm.
especially for our community with preeclampsia and HELLP syndrome, one of the hardest parts of living in the new normal following the loss of a baby is experiencing those grief triggers that you may not expect, those intense outbursts of emotions. And of course, preeclampsia and HELLP syndrome survivors are also at that extra risk of post traumatic stress disorder because of what they have been through.
Mhm.
So, um, from your book, what are some ways that a bereaved parent can handle those unexpected grief triggers that may hit us in those moments? And how can they prepare themselves mentally
Mhm.
and emotionally to handle them in the future?
Well, one of the things that I learned to do, which was really helpful, was to prepare a response ahead of time to some of the more common triggering questions or like intrusive comments. Uh, um, Things like walking, down the grocery aisle with my children and having someone ask me how many kids I have. And being able, I came up with a response. I have three at home. And that was my way of saying, okay, there's more. They're just not, they're not here, but also I don't really want to get into it right now. Or if it's somebody I trust and they want to, they ask the question, or if I'm in a really good space, I might say, I have five babies in heaven and three here on earth. Um, and a foster son in my heart. So coming up with those questions or those responses, and just it gives you sort of this level of control, and it kind of takes the surprise element and the shock element sort of out of the conversation, because we can kind of get that deer in the headlights feeling, right, when somebody asks us a question that we're not prepared for, and it's like, I don't know how to I don't know how to answer this, and I'm not sure that I feel comfortable going into this right now. So just having a prepared, like a canned response that you can practice ahead of time, that it's your go-to. So when you're in those conversations, you feel like you've got that measure of control back. And then know too, like you don't owe anybody a response that you're not comfortable with, like ever. Um, and your baby, if your baby's passed away, they're not um you don't owe them, like you're not denying them or rejecting them if you don't get into a conversation about them with somebody that you're not comfortable with. um, so just recognize that you have some measure of control of what you feel comfortable talking about, and you don't owe anyone anything.
That's a
Another
really
thing.
beautiful reminder for
Yeah,
even families who have just had the loss of an expected pregnancy experience, that at the end of the day, your story is your own.
absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, you get to decide. And I think too, if you have the ability to have some grounding techniques, I do have a couple in my book, a couple examples of things that you can do to help tamper down the trauma response that happens in your brain when you come across a trigger. So this may be driving by the hospital where you delivered. That might prompt like a lot of emotion, or watching TV and a commercial comes on for diapers, or you open your mail and you get an announcement for a baby shower or like an invitation. Those are all sort of common scenarios that can trigger that kind of uh, response where your brain starts going into survival mode. Um, and it's, it's not intentional for you. I mean, it's not a choice that you made for your brain to be triggered and to do that. Um, but one of the ways you can sort of help calm and tamper that experience down is to do those grounding techniques to help remind you that you are in the present. Your body is not in the past where this trauma happened and where your loss happened. um, your body is here, and your body is safe. And so things like breathing exercises, a very simple one is to inhale for 5 seconds, hold it for 5 seconds, exhale for 5 seconds, hold it for 5 seconds, and then do that a couple of times, and then continue that throughout the day. Um, and another one is to, and I know this is a pretty common one, but just saying, okay, what are 5 things that I can see right now? Or an even simpler one is pick a color and then look around the room or look around your environment, and then just notice all of the places in your environment that has that color. Um,
Right.
so
Yes.
it's simple techniques, um, but it really helps with just the wiring of your brain and helping get your prefrontal cortex sort of back online, um, that it's just really going to be helpful to calm all of those emotions that come with those kinds of triggers.
Definitely. And um, building those walls, those self-care walls, can help when the unexpected things trigger you.
Mhm.
So we know that when a family experiences the loss of a baby or even the loss of their expected pregnancy experience because of preeclampsia or other pregnancy conditions, people often say really well-meaning things that are ultimately totally hurtful.
Mhm.
And I think you say in your book something like, you know, 90% of the things that people will say to you are well-meaning, but 75% of them will be misguided.
Yes.
So I really appreciated that. Would you share a few example of those things that well-meaning loved ones sometimes say, but also some examples of better options that we all can use when we're talking about pregnancy and infant loss?
Mhm, mhm. Um, well, the first one that comes to mind, I don't even have this one in my book because it's just personal experience after my HELLP syndrome experience. I had someone come into my labor and delivery room after I'd given birth, a friend of a family member, and um, they were just like, "Oh, you did so good. Everything's so great." And I just remember being so angry, like, do you not know what just happened? It's like, no, not everything is great. No, I'm not okay.
Right.
um, so yeah, so it's hard, right? Because like we talked about, it's well meant. They were trying to be encouraging, and but it's dismissive. And so those kinds of things are hard. We often just refer to those kind of sayings that are quick and easy, and a lot of times we've learned them growing up, like this is an okay response to grief and to loss. We call those platitudes. And sort of the key with platitudes is that they offer a quick comfort to the supporter, to the comforter, and they're dismissive and hurtful often to the bereaved. So something like, everything happens for a reason. So to the comforter, that says, okay, if there was some cosmic reason for your baby to die, then then you can accept that, and then you don't have to feel so bad about the loss, which means I don't have to feel so bad about the loss.
Right. It feels like something else is potentially in control of this
Mhm.
crappy random thing that just happened
Right.
to you.
Right. Right. And of course, for someone whose baby has died, there is no reason ever good enough for a baby to die for a parent. Like,
Absolutely.
I don't care what you think is the universal reason why my baby died. Like, I am not okay with it. I It's like it's just not acceptable. And so that's really painful, right? Because that saying, when somebody says that to you, it implies that you should be okay with your loss. That you should have this resignation or acceptance, rather than probably all of the feelings that naturally should come with loss and with grief.
Right. We
Another
we
one.
often say here at the foundation, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to grieve.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is. And, we're talking about pregnancy loss, but, for those of you who maybe had a really terrifying experience and you had a close call, um, you know, our pregnancy experience was a close call, or with HELLP syndrome. Um, even then, I needed permission to not be okay. I needed permission for someone to say what you went through was awful and it was traumatic, and there's a reason that you're upset. And yes, at the end of the day, your baby is healthy, and that's what we all want, and that's a good thing. But that doesn't negate what you just walked through. Um, so owning, whether somebody else feels like your experience was traumatic or hard is negligent or negligible. Like, if it was hard and if it was traumatic and if you were feeling loss and you were feeling grief, then you have all of the rights to feel that fully and to embrace that. Um, Another one that I would say probably we often hear in this community would be, well, you can always try again. And for the comforter, it gives this hope. And I think they feel like they're offering hope. We'll stop focusing on what happened and just focus on what could happen. And for those of us who've walked through loss or infertility or preeclampsia, one, we don't know if we get to try again. Sometimes we don't at all. Sometimes there's unexplained losses. Sometimes the effects on our body, the way that like our body's been ravaged by the loss or preeclampsia, means that we don't get to try again. And even if we did, there's no guarantee that that baby is going to live and that pregnancy is going to be a healthy one, or that we're going to survive it. It also doesn't mean that we're suddenly going to be okay, because people are not replaceable, right? I mean,
Yes.
like if your parents were in a car accident and your dad lived and your mom didn't, it would be wildly inappropriate for someone to come up to you and say, well, your dad can always remarry and you can have another mom.
Yes, that's such a great metaphor. And I think to share with loved ones, to say, you would never say that. And,
Right.
we sort of chuckle at the idea of saying something like that, but it's the equivalent of saying, well, you can try again, you can have another baby. I don't think anything could ever replace the babies that we lost. It's just not
Absolutely.
something that any lost parent would think.
No, no. And if we are able to try again or, adopt or have a child in our home in some capacity, those children don't replace the others. They add to our family. It's kind of like when our foster son left, um, I would always say we're Lewis party of six minus one. um, they're still in many ways like a part of us and a part of our family, these children that didn't get to stay, but so we get to include them. But no matter how much we add, it doesn't take away the ones that we're missing.
That's a great segue to my next question, which is, many times parents of loss want to try again after the death of their baby.
Mm.
So, what challenges might they face when they're trying again? And what are some recommendations, some of those protections that you might suggest for them as they go into an attempt to try again for another pregnancy?
Well, I think, especially in the context of the community that we're speaking to now, be very, uh, like, understand your risks and have conversations with your medical providers about what they recommend, and get second and third opinions if you need to. Whatever you need to do to feel really comfortable and as confident as possible. I know that after having birth go sideways, um, confidence is definitely one of those things that it's like hard to muster. Um, but information is helpful. And so find as much information about your own condition, about your own experience, your own history. Really try to understand what happened, and then talk about your future risks with your OB or your MFM, your maternal fetal medicine specialist. Um, and then also, you know, I did this, and I would highly recommend, if you have a high risk pregnancy, talk to your OB about adding an MFM early on, so that you could see a specialist at the same time as you're seeing your OB. And what I did, and what was really helpful, and it may be helpful to someone here watching, is I needed a plan for like everything that could go wrong. And
Right.
so when I met with my OB and I was pregnant with my rainbow baby, um, it was like, initially it was like, okay, well, what are we gonna do if this is a topic? And so then we had the discussion and we came up with a plan. And then, because of my history of threatened premature labor, okay, what are we gonna do if this if I go into labor early, or if HELLP syndrome shows up? Um, so I had kind of all of these, I don't want to call them birth plans, but like I knew what was going to happen for the most part if certain complications arose that I was at higher risk for. Ask what can we do to, is there anything we can do to help with preventing? My doctor had me on aspirin. So ask those kinds of questions like, what can I actively do to support the health of this pregnancy? And hope, in hopes of having as positive of an outcome as possible. With my pregnancies too, I had progesterone supplementation, and the jury's kind of out on if that's helpful or not, but it doesn't hurt. And what was helpful for me is it made me feel like I was doing something.
Right, that you had some action that you could take. And
Yes.
I think one of the things that I hear a lot from high risk obstetricians is that a future pregnancy may not look like a perfect 40-week, no intervention kind of pregnancy. It's just
Mhm.
not going to look like that. But you can still have a good pregnancy experience. It's just maybe going to involve a few more steps than what, kind of the average
Mhm.
non-intervention pregnancy may look like.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, going to extra doctor's appointments or having more non-stress tests toward the end. They started those early for me, and then I had them more frequently um, than, your average person. So yeah, it might not look exactly the same. But good outcomes can be possible even if you have a really severe history of bad outcomes. So just doing everything that's in your power, even if things don't end up working out the way that you hope, just knowing that you've done all that you can provide some measure of comfort. um,
Yes. And accepting the joy of the small moments and
mhm,
also accepting the grief of the some of the big moments. So
absolutely.
it's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
So that leads me to a really important question that I'd like to kind of have us end on, which is how can the Preeclampsia Foundation and the community that is watching this video continue to best support our lost community? What are some actions that we can take and things that we can do that will just help make those families' journey a little easier?
Mm. I think that just talking about it and bringing something out into the light, it can be such a helpful thing. When somebody has gone through a difficult pregnancy that's ended in loss, there can be a feeling of, well, I don't get to talk about this now. So I've heard from many people that have had a birth experience that's ended in a loss, that they may be with with friends or with family members, and everybody else can talk about their birth. They can share birth stories, and then when it comes to the person who's had a loss, they feel like nobody wants to hear their story, even though their birth was very real, and their experience was very real. And I think sometimes when we shroud things in secrecy, it in turn shrouds them in shame. And so just being able to say, like, this happens and it's okay to talk about, and let's raise awareness for these babies who have died. Let's raise awareness that complications like this happen. Let's normalize the conversation. And so that way people have support. I think all of us sharing our stories can be really healing and really helpful. One of the things that was really helpful for me after my preeclampsia experience was going to the Preeclampsia Foundation website and reading other people's stories, and knowing that there was someone out there who could relate to my experience and to my fear and to the trauma that happened, just knowing that I wasn't alone. So I think that continuing for all of us to continue sharing our stories as we can so that other people know that they're not alone. And then, I think raising just awareness with information about preeclampsia, like you guys are already doing. Um, here's what can happen, here's what did happen, and understanding the biological nature of what our body just went through. um, take some of the mystery out of what what happened. And it doesn't fix anything to know that, but I do think it helps just understanding what our bodies just went through.
Yes,
So
and just like talking about our loss experiences,
mhm,
talking about what happened to us and better understanding what happened to our body helps
mhm,
us to make it very much more real and to be
mhm,
able to process that in an emotionally healthy way.
absolutely. Hmm.
Rachel, thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing your story, not just with the Preeclampsia Foundation community, but with all of the world who has experienced pregnancy and infant loss. Where can our community connect with you and get a copy of Unexpecting as a resource for pregnancy and infant loss families?
So you can purchase Unexpecting from most anywhere that sells books. Um, Many stores are carrying it in person. Of course, online you can look as well. I have a link for different places that you can purchase the books on my website, unexpectingbook.com. And I also have a free chapter that may better help answer the question, like, how do we support someone through baby loss? So it's a free chapter you can get on that website, unexpectingbook.com. It'll just put in your information, it'll send it to you automatically. Um, and then again, there's the links there as well. So that should be like a really good source for all things related to the book.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Is there any last words that you'd like to leave for our community?
Well, I just think my heart is with you, and you're probably going through a lot of emotions. Um, just as you process your experiences and your losses and your difficulty. And I just want to say, first, you're not alone in going through those. You are really surrounded by a community of people who care and want to support you through what you're going through. And they really understand. We can't understand exactly how you feel, but we can relate in so many ways. And so there's a community of us that do you know, want to support you so much. And then give yourself permission to feel however you need to feel for however long you need to feel it. You don't have to judge your emotions or your reactions or your responses. You don't have to qualify them or compare them. They get to be valid and accepted exactly as they are. So if you are feeling like you're feeling something, but you feel like that feeling is wrong, I just want to assure you it's not, and that you have every right to grieve this loss or even this experience however you need to.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me on today.